Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, I hope you had a very good Thanksgiving because we are in for a wild December. And as the world continues to be apparently engulfed in flames, controversy rises, and stress levels accelerate, I can think of no better guest than to help us get perspective and clarity and wisdom than a great friend of the show. The great and powerful Sebastian Junger is back on Independent Americans. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
Fourth time, man. Fourth
Yeah,
time on the show.
right.
The first time was May 2021. Then we did January 6th, 23. Then we did
Uh,
November 9th, 23. And now here we are, December 24. I got to ask you more than anybody else, since you died and came back, where are you and how are you?
oh, I'm great. We're in New York. I live here with my family, my wife and two little girls, who are 7 and 4, and they're in public school nearby, and my health is fine. I had a ruptured aneurysm in my pancreatic artery, which is a utterly random thing. It's not like a heart attack or something where you got to deal with other health issues that produce the problem. It's like I got stabbed in the stomach or something. It's like that random, and there's no follow-on issues. If you survive, you survive, and there's no issues. So yeah, I'm good. I'm an athlete. I work out a lot. I'm hoping to make it a long time because I'm an older dad and I want to see my daughters through as far as possible.
Well, they're going to need you. The country's going to need you. The show's going to need you. I wanted to talk about being an old dad because I feel you on that one. And I want to talk to you about all things Trump, the state of the country, but also congratulate you, man. I mean, you came on the show, I think, right before the book was ready to come out. You know, in my time of dying, I don't know if it's a bestseller or not, but it's everywhere. And you've been everywhere. So congratulations on that. It seems like the book has been really received very well. And a lot of people feel like they're dying right now. So I think we're going to need to talk to you
Yeah,
and get this
yeah,
perspective.
yeah. Yeah, I thank you. Yeah, it was a bestseller for a while, and it's still out there. Hudson Booksellers picked it as their #1 nonfiction book of the year, and Barnes and Noble did something similar. So yeah, it's got currency, and I almost died. I'm an atheist. Uh, my father was an atheist and a physicist, which is like atheist squared.
Yeah.
And as I was dying, he, appeared above me to welcome me, and I woke up in the ICU the next day. And when I was informed that I'd almost died, I really it got me to thinking about a lot of things that I felt like I didn't understand something basic about reality and consciousness and the universe. And so it's a short book, but it's about that experience and what the possible explanations might be for what is called an NDE, a near-death experience. They're very, very common. So that's the essence of the book, and it's still out there and doing its thing.
And I recommend everybody check it out. It makes a great stocking stuffer. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see my tree is half done. We're getting there, but it's holiday times. Trump takes office in a little over a month. You've got this perspective that you've been asked to expand upon on every basically media platform under the sun. But after going through that experience, and last time you came on here, you warned us about the similarities you see with Trump and fascism. It's all come together now. But you're a guy who also kind of understands deeply this country. I think you understand democracy. I think you understand grievance. You understand a lot of the elements that surround Trump and this moment in America. So can I ask you to use all that wisdom and perspective and kind of give us a sense of where the hell you think we are right now as a country, as we go into the holidays and face all these daunting challenges and changes? What do you make of it all, Sebastian?
Well, yeah, that's a long conversation. I'll start in, and at the point where I start to get tedious, please jump in and stop me. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'll just put it that way because it's an unending conversation. So just for clarity and transparency, I'm a Democrat. I'm an atheist, right? And as a journalist, I try to be very neutral. Although I happen to be liberal, classified as a liberal, I believe that a basic liberal outlook and a basic conservative outlook are equally legitimate, and they actually, in dynamic tension with each other, create quite a healthy society. And in fact, there is considerable evidence that those two basic political philosophies are rooted in our genetics. They're a product of our evolution, and that they're both adaptive. And so, and humans are basically 50-50, one or the other, right? So that is my starting point as a journalist. We need both responsible versions of both. And I do not think we have responsible versions of both. I'll start with the sins of the Democrats, which are numerous. This should have been an easy one, right? I mean, Trump, even his supporters acknowledge that he exemplifies a kind of harsh authoritarian viewpoint and intention, which is at odds with the spirit, at least the spirit, if not the letter, of our founding documents, our founding fathers' visions, right? I mean, even supporters of Trump acknowledge it's a little unseemly to wish that you had Hitler's generals because they were loyal, right? It makes everyone a little uncomfortable, right? So running against someone like this should have been easy for the Democrats, right? We should have been able to defeat him in our sleep. And one of the things I hate most about the Democrats is their willing embrace of the victim position and their accusations that things are being done to them, right? How could this be done to us? Well, you know what? Both in Hillary and Kamala, we had wonderfully smart women who weren't that great, weren't particularly charismatic in front of a microphone, but they had a lot to recommend them, but they just sucked as candidates, right? I mean, Kamala, and I voted for her, but Kamala looked great compared to Biden and Trump. That's a terrible context to look great in. If Biden, who I have some real fondness for, but also huge disappointments in, if he had done as he said and stepped down after the first term, we would have had a proper primary. I do not think Kamala would have won a proper Democratic primary. And so what we ended up with this sort of pinch hitter at the last moment because Biden was ultimately selfish in his insistence that he run, even though I think he kind of knew he couldn't succeed. Or maybe he didn't know that and then he's delusional, but whatever, like that, he did that to us, right? And then on top of it, the left wing, forgive me if I'm like treading on any ground or anything, but what has come forward, I mean, the left wing used to be the party of sort of like working people in the Midwest, the Rust Belt. I mean, back in the 40s and 50s, the Democrats were the party of the working class, right? Unionize, fight the corporations, right? That used to be what the left was, and we've become incredibly elitist. We have walked away from those people and their concerns. They had nowhere to go but Trump, who welcomed them, of course, and played, I think played to their fears and their trauma and their anger. And finally, and I'll sort of end with this, what has taken the place of those honorable and solid concerns for working people, what has filled the vacuum in the left-wing ethos are, in my opinion, very, very abstract concerns about bathrooms and gender and women, men playing on women's sports teams and stuff that just like in a very narrow context, perhaps there's some legitimacy. I wouldn't want any trans person to suffer any sort of prejudice whatsoever anywhere in their life, like I wouldn't want anyone to, right? But making those kinds of issues the tentpole issue for the Democratic Party going into an election like this, you're just going to lose an awful lot of people, including a lot of left-wing people who just do not connect to those ideas. And even if they kind of abstractly agree with them, they might not think this is the foremost and most important issue we are facing in America today is men playing on women's soccer teams. Like even if we think that's maybe okay, which I personally don't, it certainly isn't the primary issue the world is facing. Give me a friggin' break, right? So we set ourselves up for this, and ultimately and then finally, and then I really will end. Finally, the sort of narrative of like the patriarchy is won once again, right? Trump's percentage of the women's vote increased by 4% from 2020 to 2024 when there was a woman on the ballot, right? 4% more women voted for Trump this time around. Huge gains in the Latino population and the Black population. So, and gender issues and race issues happen to be darlings by our, I mean, the liberals, right? The Democrats, those happen to be our darlings. We flatter ourselves in thinking that those are the two issues that we care about most and take care of most. And the fact that we lost percentage point, I mean, significant margins of voters to Trump from those two camps, people of color and women, like if we can't take that information and say we have gone off the trail somewhere, if we can't own this as a flaw, as a fault, as a mistake of our own, then we will never win another election, and nor would we deserve to.
Which might happen the way this is going, right? I mean, I want to pull something out specifically, Sebastian. I think you are uniquely positioned to talk about. There is a discussion in this country about masculinity and about the intersection of masculinity and patriotism and toughness. And I think that has been really underappreciated, right? I mean, what we're talking about often is a man running against a woman, right? And that's been the case, right? We have these examples, right? But it's much more complicated than that. It has to do with the disconnect and a failure to understand, I think, like basic American toughness and even the American DNA. And you have been in a unique position because you've written about these things, you've talked about these things, you've explored these things, and you went on Joe Rogan, right? And I think that's a great example of how badly they missed, right? Because I don't think, not only did she not go on Joe Rogan, I don't think the party understands Joe Rogan, right? And there's a lot about Joe Rogan that should concern people, the conspiracy theories, the other stuff, but just the magnitude of him, right? The 11 million listeners versus maybe 500,000 on an average show on MSNBC or CNN, the scope, the scale, the devotion. Can I ask you to talk about what do you think Joe Rogan is, right? What does he represent? Is he the next Rush Limbaugh? Is he something different? Can you put him and his power and his influence and his rise even in some kind of broader context? And just take us inside. What was it like to go in the place where Trump went and Kamala didn't?
Yeah, and let's circle back to masculinity as well after we do this, because I think it's an important piece of the puzzle. But so I don't, I have a flip phone. I don't listen to podcasts. So all I know about Joe Rogan is my experience with him personally, right? And whatever I read. So yeah, some of his conspiracy theories are unfortunate, as they are unfortunate for all people, right? And there's lots of left-wing conspiracy theories as well. They're just nonsense, right? And one of them being that the patriarchy stole the election from Hillary Clinton and from Kamala Harris. That's a conspiracy theory. There's no data to back it up, right? So, so other than that, Joe himself, he's extremely personable. He's forthright in his opinions, but he will also, let me say, a rare and wonderful trait. He will also, if corrected about something, if he sees that he's wrong about something, he will immediately concede, right? He does not sort of plant his flag and stand on an absurdity, right? And I can't remember what this was. A couple of times he said something. I say, actually, that's not true because of this. And I can't remember the issues, but it's happened twice.
Yep.
And he immediately was like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about it that way. Yeah, cool. There was just zero issue, right? And that to me is someone who has an alive and active mind, and those are the kind of people I prefer to talk to. And either left wing or right wing, I don't care if you're in that. If you're willing to sort of like stand corrected and reevaluate what you think I'm in, man. I'll talk to you all day long.
But so there's a Venn diagram of like, you're talking about near-death experiences, right? You're a guy who's been to Afghanistan and all over the world. You're a tough guy. And then, there's the Rogan audience. So can I maybe just ask you to pull that apart a little bit? Because I think there's a lot of overlap between the people that I talk to, the people that you talk to, the people that Rogan talks to, and they feel like they felt like an unrepresented group in the political discussion. I think some of that fueled Trump's win. I think some of that fuels the pushback against the Democrats, but I think it's also bigger. It's kind of a pushback against everything. It's kind of a middle finger to the establishment that I feel in a lot of what you write and talk about. But you're able to capture Ken Burns called it grievance. What do you call it? This energy that is captured a bit by Rogan, by Trump, by some of your work and mine. What do you call it?
Well, I feel like he's collected a lot of people who are sort of contrarian because it makes them feel smart and powerful, right? So I was on a podcast recently with a wonderful woman named Jillian Michaels, right?
So
And she's right, so she's pretty popular, and she's got it. She's not a female Joe Rogan, but where there's some overlap. They're friends, and there's some overlap in the listenership. And so I was looking at the comments, and Jillian brought up Ukraine and some sort of right wing, chew toys, right? And I had what I think is a sort of rational conversation about what the stakes really are and what the issues really are here. And in the comments, there was some dude who was like, yes, Ukraine, a sovereign country, that he's clearly a paid asset. I'm like, wow, your life must be friggin' easy, bro. Like if things are that simple, like because I said something that you didn't agree with, I'm a paid asset. Like,
mm-hmm.
what's your life like if you ever get out of your parents' basement? Like, what is your life like, right? So I think there's a certain amount of that in the demographics that listen to some kinds of podcasts, and Joe Rogan particularly. But let's see. And I think a lot of them are male. A lot of those people are male, and
Yep.
um, so let's see what's going on with, if we may, with young men for a moment, right, in this country, because I feel like Trump, Joe Rogan, there are people who have inherited a sort of disenfranchised and lost and ultimately powerless group of young men who are looking for a home and looking for a way to feel powerful, as we all do, right? We all want home and to feel powerful. And these young men, they're lost tribe and they're looking for their leader, right? And so I was at a dinner party, a kind of high level dinner party with some, people I won't name that you would know their names, right? And it was all very genteel and liberal and polite, lovely people, great food, et cetera, right? And at one point, because I'd like been with American soldiers, someone was like, "So you understand, young men, why are they all flocking to Donald Trump?" Right? And I said something like, I'm going to say this better now than I said at the time because I'm not a very quick study. But basically what I said to them was, "Are you really asking me why the party that came up with back in the 80s when I was in college, all sex is rape?" What a lovely slogan, right? Followed up with toxic masculinity, male privilege, like the party, the political establishment that came up with those ghastly slogans, right? That they are losing male voters. Like, are you really proposing that a party that comes up with this stuff and has it as one of its tentpole issues, that like that might not alienate some young men who actually don't feel that all sex is rape, do not feel that masculinity is inherently toxic, right? If there's toxic masculinity and femininity, then we can have those conversations, but that's not what happened, right? And those people came perilously close to basically saying masculinity is by definition toxic, right? And finally, white male privilege. Like, I'm sorry, there's coal miners in Kentucky who are not on, they're not on top of anything, right? I mean, except a slag heap, right, outside a coal mine, right? Like, tell me that those guys, that coal miner in Kentucky has more privilege legally, economically, politically, culturally than a woman of color graduating Yale Law School. Like, try to tell me that, right? It's nonsense. And the
Mm-hmm.
left wing will not have a conversation about class, socioeconomic class. They will not do it because we've become an elitist institution. It's the one bias, it's the one thing that predicts poor outcomes in this person's life is education and social class, and the left wing will not have that conversation.
Right.
So Joe Rogan came along and he's like, as rightfully so, he said, look, maleness isn't inherently toxic. In fact, it has some very valuable attributes that all societies need, right? Ditto femaleness. Like, we can have that conversation, but Joe Rogan and some other people associated with the sort of libertarian right wing came along to harvest these people. And you know what? It's on the left wing that we didn't provide an honorable and thoughtful home, ideological home for young males. We greeted them with toxic masculinity. So, like, sorry, that's what happens when you do that.
Yeah, yeah. I think the way you're unpacking it is really, really important because the country is still kind of behind this, right? And now you see you kind of saw the Democratic Party even maybe overcompensate with somebody like Tim Walz, right? They try to pick Tim Walz, and he's kind of like a softer, nicer version of a Republican right-wing guy, right? And now you're seeing the Democratic Party very quickly, guys like Seth Moulton, right? That Marine from Massachusetts, has got an op-ed saying, here's what's wrong with the Republican Democratic Party. Pat Ryan, another veteran from New York, another white guy, right? There's that kind of this rush of white guys to go to the top. And there are a lot of white guys who haven't felt like they were in leadership positions in the Democratic Party, which kind of takes me to where we are now, where most people, I think, are still saying, fuck both of them. Right. And there's a big part of that in Joe Rogan's audience and your audience and mine, people who just want none of the above. But we've also got standards. And it's happening at a time where Trump is putting forward the most insane and radical cabinet nominees we've ever seen, right? A Navy secretary that's never been in the Navy, an undersecretary who's never been in the military and who's a defense contractor, essentially. And now we've got Pete Hegseth, who may be out by the time this drops. Yeah. If you don't know Pete Hegseth, you know guys like him, right? And you've seen this happen over the last 20 years, especially veterans who've become more radicalized. And I think that Hegseth has become radicalized. What do you make of him specifically? And again, he might be down by the time this drops, but he's ascended very quickly. He comes from that world of podcasts and Joe Rogan and masculinity, and he could be Secretary of Defense, despite all of his issues and challenges.
I mean, Trump is running a TV show basically, right? And I feel like he, with the occasional exception, I think his tendency is to put forward good-looking white men to run things, right? I think he just likes the visuals of it, right? And I don't know the man's mind. I'm just saying this because of what, the names that have come up. So, and I don't know Hegseth, his defense of essentially an American war criminal, the SEAL team leader, Galloway is
Gallagher,
Galloway?
yep.
Gallagher. Absolutely revolting. I mean, that should have no part in a democracy and in this United States. Saying that, Guantanamo, we missed a chance. Something like it should have been the place where we could torture people into confessions and then execute them. Hegseth said something around that idea, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Absolutely revolting. Those are not democratic sentiments. I reject them. I abhor them. But let me just say about the radicalism in Trump's vision here. So H.L. Mencken, wonderful writer from mid-century, he has this wonderful quote, and he was asked about democracy, and he said, democracy, the idea that the American public knows what's best and gets it given to them good and hard, right? So that's what's happening. And part of me is like, okay, you all voted for this guy, right? The last time around, we were protected. He was himself protected from his worst instincts by having Democrats in government, and by having institutional guardrails and institutionalists in these departments who kept guys like Kelly, who kept things roughly on the road, right? We didn't drive into a ditch because we had guardrails like that, right? Bill Barr, I mean, who I'm not a fan of, but even he was a guardrail. Like, who knew that you could be that extreme and a guardrail? Like, that's the new world. Right. So now what I kind of love about this is, because I'm tired of Republicans telling Democrats the problem's you guys, right? We have the solutions if you'd only let us run the country. You know what? You are now running the country, right? And you voted for this guy, and he's a quasi-fascist authoritarian. But you voted for him. So let's find out how it goes, shall we? Let's find out once and for all how authoritarian the American public really is, how much stomach we actually have for his ultimate fantasies when they are Trump's fantasies. And so I kind of love, in a way, the more extreme these people are, the more I kind of love it, because we are finding out right now, like what I want to know. If I'm worried I have cancer, I want to know. I want to do a PET scan, and I want to know right now, do I or not, right? And I feel like right now we're at the PET scan phase of this process, will the country adhere to its democratic principles, or are we going to go the full authoritarian extremist route? And you know what? I think if it does that, and it may well, I think it's going to collapse. I think the Republicans do very well when they have an enemy. They no longer have an enemy because the Democrats are totally out of power. I think the extremism of his visions and the sheer incompetence of many of these nominees will sink almost every initiative that Trump wants to make happen, right? I think, and even the stuff that he does, and I'll end with this, the stuff that he does make happen, I think will have, I have read, will have massive economic and political blowback, like the tariffs. Inflation is going to be a disaster. That goes to the deporting 10 million people. Like you do all that stuff, the consequences are catastrophic, and I think the blowback will be catastrophic. So basically, it's like, all right, fuck around and find out. Let's find out. Let's see how this works. And if it doesn't work, let's move on to a new era where both the left wing and the right wing are like firmly put in the like garbage disposal in the sink, fed through the machinery, flushed out of our system, and we come up with some new visions for both parties.
Well, you are a guy who's comfortable sleeping in the dirt with no electricity, so that might be what we have to endure in order for that to happen, right? You're going to stick around, Sebastian, for a couple of extra questions for our Patreon members. I want to thank them for their support and for helping us bring Sebastian back for, I think, a record fourth time. Let me, you kind of said there's the old Batman line, this town needs an enema, right? And like maybe that's what's going to happen here. Maybe, I don't know if he is going to go through our system or if he's going to destroy our system. And I guess what I want to ask you is, with all of this looming, I'm going to talk more about this in the days to come, but there's very likely a scenario in January where he tries to activate and federalize National Guard units, and then governors say no, right? And there are legal battles, unprecedented degrees of struggle where our troops are maybe chew toys like we've never seen before, right? They used to be political chew toys in Iraq, but now they may be political chew toys here at home. I hope that one day you write like a sci-fi or dystopian movie, because I think it would be awesome. But give me your no shit, and this is not the time to sprinkle sunshine. How bad do you think it's going to get? Because you understand this, you have a good feel for the country, you've seen other parts of the world. We saw what happened in South Korea this week. That can go a lot of different ways. Before we go through that, if it goes along the ways you're saying, I always want to talk about not just what's happening, but what's next. How bad do you think it's going to get in the next 3 months, Sebastian, next 6 months?
Honestly, not that bad. I mean, one of the few things that unites both the left and the right is an abhorrence of misuse of state power, of federal power, right? Both the left, the hippies on one side, and the libertarians, the sort of paranoid right wing on the other side, they hate when the federal government or the state imposes its will on the people, right? So if you have National Guard troops arrayed against civilians, implementing whatever agenda it is. I mean, it's a Kent State situation, or it's rounding up illegal migrants who are working hard in businesses that actually can't afford to pay what they would have to in a country that enjoys a fairly low unemployment rate, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you have 19-year-olds with M16s in the streets arrayed against the populace. I don't think that's a right wing. That's not a visual that the right wing's particularly thrilled with either, even if those policies are ones that they kind of agree with, right? Like I just I don't see that going very far. And I think it would be an extremely dangerous thing for Trump to try to implement. I can't imagine any general or any officer and most soldiers obeying an illegal order for the use of force within the 50 states of this country, or somewhere else for that matter. I just don't see the professional army doing that. My sort of reference point is fascism in Spain. My father grew up in Spain. They left when Franco came in. And in that case, a lot of the army did sign on to the fascist agenda. And that's why Franco won the Civil War. I cannot imagine other than who is it? Flynn, other than
Mike Flynn. Yeah.
Mike Flynn, General Flynn.
Yeah.
Other than him, I think most generals are incredibly aware of the Constitution and their democratic duties and would never violate that oath. So I think Trump messes with that at his peril. I think that's a big implosion for him if he tries to do that.
So you're giving folks, I think, a little bit of hope for folks who are worried this might all be on fire next time I talk to you. I appreciate that. I think your perspective is always incredibly valuable. I hope everyone will go out and check Sebastian's book. Go read everything he's written, and go check out Tribe. Go check out Restrepo, the film that was nominated for an Academy Award. I think that Sebastian is such an important and valuable voice and a conscience for our country. I've said that before. You live in New York. Will you run for mayor? How about it? Everybody else is running for mayor. Why not you?
Yeah, maybe
No?
not.
All right.
No, I don't. I think I'd make a terrible politician.
I don't know. I mean, guys who would make terrible, when I talk to you, anybody who listens to the show, you feel a little Dan Osborne there. You feel a little bit of the populism, and I think that you'd get a lot of support, whatever you do. But in the meantime, thank you for joining us. Thank you for all you do for this country. Your work over the last 20 years plus has been incredible, especially since I've been exposed to it. And I'm honored to call you a friend. And you're a tremendous example of what's possible in this country and just always adding value. So your kids are lucky to have you. I wish you a very happy holiday, and keep talking about the other side, man, because we're going to need to talk about something else in the next couple of months.
Hey, thank you. I always enjoy it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Stay vigilant.